I'm going to introduce our next presenter, Alex Boxhall. She is a software engineer at Google, where she works on improving accessibility support in Google Chrome. She's also the creator of the Accessibility Developer Tools project. We're very happy to have her here for this next presentation on accessible web components. It's all yours, Alice. Just working out mic issues. Hmm. Thanks everyone for your patience. We're just having a little bit of an issue with the audio, and we're working through that. What would the end of the day be without a little technical difficulty? Thanks, Marcy. Appreciate the support. Perfect.
Okay, how about now?
There you go. Thanks.
Great. Cool. Right. Yeah, browsers, who makes these things? Um, okay. So I have to excuse myself a little bit. I found out about this last week, as we all did, and then immediately went on leave until basically yesterday. So my slides are a little bit rough and ready. My talk is going to be nowhere near as awesome as Marcy's, but hopefully it'll be at least informative. Okay, so do I get to drive the slides here? Yes. Okay, how do I request control? Oh, like that. Cool. So yeah, anyone who's interested in following along, please go ahead and go to that short link. I'll paste it in again. Uh, Because there's a lot of code and a bunch of links in the slides. So if you want to follow along, if you're having trouble seeing the code or whatever, you can get the slides there. Cool. Right. Yes. So I'm going to be talking a bit more about web components. So Marcy introduced web components this morning with much more panache, but essentially it's a collection of technologies, a collection of standards that are coming down the pipe. We have element templates, we have custom elements, we have shadow DOM, we have HTML imports, and we have decorators which aren't even spec'd yet. And taken together, we get reusable web components. So I'm going to give another example of what this looks like in a moment. But first, I'm going to briefly introduce Polymer again. So Polymer is a collection of polyfills for the web component technologies that are still being implemented in browsers. So the idea being that we polyfill each of these technologies, and then as the browsers implement them, that polyfill just goes away. And so the Polymer platform library just shrinks and shrinks and shrinks over time. So right now in Chrome beta, You don't need the Shadow DOM polyfill at all. So Shadow DOM is one for everyone in Chrome Beta. That'll be coming to stable sometime soon. And Polymer is also an opinionated framework for creating custom elements. So Marcy showed us a bit about how to create custom elements just using the standard web standards. I'm going to be giving examples of just using Polymer to create custom elements. So it gives you a lot of syntactic sugar and abstracts away a lot of the stuff that the browser is doing. So yeah, if you're interested to learn more about Polymer, there's a link there. All right, so this is an example of using a Polymer custom element. So we're including that platform.js, which is all of those polyfills, and we're also including, so this link rel import is an example of an HTML import. That's pulling in the actual template for my custom element, which is in our components next to this demo. And then the Polymer UI ratings that I've helpfully outlined there renders, as you can see on the right. So it's a very cute little ratings widget. You have 5 stars. The stars are filled in or not filled in, depending on how many stars you've selected. So you can click the stars and it'll change the rating. So this is what the actual implementation looks like. I've deleted some details. I've taken out the styles. I've taken out all the comments. You can see the full version if you go to that GitHub link. But essentially what we have, this Polymer element. So Polymer really takes the everything is an element idea to an extreme. So we have a Polymer element and we have some attributes on that element that are going to determine the behavior of the element. So we have a name, we have an extends. So Marcy was showing us an example of extending a button. In this case, it's extending something called theme aware. So that means that we can apply, in this case, it's a light or a dark theme, depending on what the background of the page is going to be. We have 2 attributes, count and value, which means that those are attributes that we can apply when we use the element in the page. We have some presentation markup. So we have a style sheet, and then we have the 5 stars. And so you can see it's pretty straightforward. They're just full or not full style, depending on how many stars have been selected. And then we have this Polymer method, which creates the object, which is backing this custom element, which does the actual JavaScript logic. We have a count change function. So this is a magic function that shows up because we have this count attribute. So we have a count changed attribute, which will be triggered whenever that count attribute changes. In this case, it's just, so count is the number of stars. So you could set it to 10 stars or 7 stars or whatever you want. And in that case, it's going to put those stars back in the row. And we have an update value method, which is called from the onTap event in the star span. So each star will have an onTap event, and that's triggered on a tap or a click, and that is going to call the update value method. So the upshot is you end up having this cute little custom element that we saw where you can tap or click on each of the stars to change the value. So the way this is actually rendered in the page uses this Shadow DOM thing that we've been talking about. So this is just a screenshot of looking at it in Chrome Developer Tools. And you can see that the stars, so everything is inside the shadow root in this case. So it's all presentation, so it's all inside the shadow root. Oh, thanks. And yeah, there's nothing really too mysterious about it. It's just a nice way of encapsulating that presentation logic and presenting a componentized element. So we can put in this Polymer UI ratings element, set the value, set the count. It'll be rendered, it'll be interactive, it'll just do what we want. The implementation details are just hidden away for us. It also means that no one can style it. So yes, is it accessible? Does it have keyboard interaction? Does it have any kind of text alternatives? Does it have any semantic markup, which is something Marcy went into great detail on this morning? Or is it high contrast compatible? And the answer is none of those. It is not accessible in any way. So, all right, what can we do to fix this? First thing we can do is address keyboard accessibility. So this is going to be a familiar story to pretty much all of you. But the way it looks in Polymer is pretty straightforward. So we get, as I said, we have these magic actions. So we have on, and then the event name that'll just be triggered when appropriate. So we can use the on key down action, bind that to the key down action function inside of the Polymer object, and then we can use the guidance given in the ARIA design patterns for a slider element, sort of anticipating a bit what role we're going to give this, but never mind. So we can handle the arrow keys, end and home keys, and set the value accordingly. And of course, we need to apply a tab index to make sure that we can actually focus this element. So once we've done those things, we have our focusable element. And unfortunately, I can't do a live demo, partly because I didn't really prepare one and partly because I am not controlling the computer. But you can take my word for it that the keyboard interaction does work. You can use left and right arrows to change the value, left, right, up, down, home, end, all work. You can go to, you can check it out from that GitHub URL if you want to have a play with it yourself. Okay, so and we see that a tab index attribute has sprouted on this element. This is going to be a bit of a theme. So, all right, what about semantics? So I just wanted to quickly show off, in case anyone hasn't seen it before, the Chrome accessibility page. So there are obviously accessibility viewers that you can use on a per platform basis, but this is one that's built right into the browser. You can use it on Chrome OS, you can use it wherever you want. It's going to show you the accessibility tree for that platform, not sort of a device independent one. So this is obviously, I'm looking at this on a Mac. But yeah, so we can see that we have a web area and then we have a group. So the ratings widget must be the group, which is not really ideal. So just to compare and contrast, here we have a range input with the same min, max, and current value. And that gets correctly translated into a slider with a value of 3, minimum 5, minimum 0, max of 5. We also have a DOM object where we get the min, max, and value attributes available to us. So we can manipulate those in JavaScript and assistive technology can get access to it. And that's great, that's as it should be. When we look at our ratings widget, we do have that visual rendering that we want, and that's great, it's all abstracted away. We have a DOM object and we have the value and count attributes as well that we can manipulate in JavaScript and change on any kind of event. But our accessibility node is just a group. It's essentially a div, which is really what we don't want. So obviously, we want to add some ARIA. So we can start off by adding a role, which is usually where we start. So obviously, in this case, we're going to pick a slider. It's a little widget. We can use the arrow keys to change the value. Nothing else really has to change so far. But to most of you listening, the problem with this is going to be obvious. So great, it's now being exposed as a slider, but the value, min value, and max value are all being exposed as 0. And that makes this a bit sad. So another quick, I guess, product placement, except it's a free and open source product. So please contribute and please use it. The Accessibility Developer Tools extension will actually give you information about your ARIA compliance, about your ARIA spec compliance. So in this case, we can see that we've added the slider role, but we're missing the required values of ARIA value max, ARIA value min, and ARIA value now. And you can see also below that, it's given us some information about the focusability and visibility of the elements as well. And that works inside Shadow DOM now as well. So that's cool. So, right, so we've added the slider role. We can also add value min, value max, and value now. As you can see, we've had to do this in script, even though we do have data binding, because those attributes need to be on the outside of the template. So we have the template element. Anything in there can use data binding. So if it was inside the template, we could just set them to use data binding. I should have really prepared a slide on what that would look like. But anyway, you can see that we need to set it in JavaScript, and we need to pick our moment to do that. So obviously, we're picking ready. So there's a lifetime event called ready, which happens when the element is ready on the page. And so then we're just going to go ahead and set the value min to be 0, because in this case, we know it's always going to be 0. Another alternative would be to set that on the Polymer element, like we set the slider. That's a value judgment, really, no pun intended. Count changed is when we're going to set value max. Obviously, the count is equivalent to the value max. They're essentially the same thing. In fact, they're exactly the same thing. Value changed is another magic action that's happening when the value is changing. So that's obviously the right time to change value now. Right. So here we have our Polymer UI ratings element with semantic information, with keyboard handling. Awesome. It's vaguely accessible now. So here we can see the accessibility tree is now happy. We have our values, we have our role. It's still slightly lacking in polish. So when we use VoiceOver on it, for example, we can see that it says 60% slider, not really reflecting what the widget is. It's a star widget, it's readings. So it'd be nice to use some ARIA value text to set the actual text value. So this is obviously a quick and dirty implementation. If we were doing this for something production ready, we'd certainly want to use an internationalization library for this, but this is going to do the job for now. So here we have our fully semantically marked up Polymer UI ratings widget. It's saying it has a value text of 3 stars, a value of 3, value max of 5, etc., etc., etc. So this is looking pretty good. So I'm typing Polymer UI ratings, setting a value and a count on it, and then essentially Polymer is vomiting all of this extra stuff into the page. Not sure how I feel about that. So for custom elements, web components accessibility right now, there's some ugliness, and this may be the controversial part of the talk. So if all of my reading code aloud has put you to sleep, you might want to wake up now so that you can angrily comment in the little chat box as I describe what I'm about to say. So I am not a fan of sprouting attributes. This is what we end up with on this element. So it's really verbose, it's really noisy, and it's, to my eyes, it's leaking a lot of implementation details. We don't need to know what the ARIA role is. We don't need to know what the ARIA value min is. It's like, it's inherent, it's implicit in the element. The value is 3, the count is 5. That's all we should need to know. If this was an input element, it would suffice to set the value and the max. But because this is a web component, we have to actually add all these extra attributes. So, all right, what can we do to fix this? Well, this will sort of work right now. I personally don't think this is a good idea, but you can add an extra container element inside the shadow root to add all of this ARIA and tab index information on. Watching people type. So here are the reasons why I don't think this is a great idea. It's going to add extra weight to the DOM. For every single time we instantiate any custom element, it's going to add an extra DOM node for that element. Moving tab index inside of the shadow DOM can cause some problems. It'll be great for, sorry, I'm just reading what Carl's saying. It'd be great for it to be in the prototype. Sorry, I don't know what you mean by the prototype. The template? using data binding. Okay. Anyway, so here's why I don't think this is a good idea. I don't like adding extra weight to the DOM where because just to hide implementation details. Also, moving tab indexes inside of Shadow DOM can cause problems. So, for example, what if I need to set this manually set the tab index? So, for example, I probably don't want to set tab index greater than 1, but I might have a legitimate reason to do it. I also might want to set the tab index to be -1 to make it temporarily unfocusable. Or maybe I just don't have any idea what I'm doing and I'm trying to put a tab index on it for some reason. And it's also just semantically weird. So what we really are trying to say is that this custom element is a slider. It has these value min, value max, etc. So, all right, we still kind of have a problem. Yep. We also have another problem, which is that I'm having that same problem where all the stuff's moved around. But anyway, we're duplicating information. And as good developers, that should make us all really sad. So we already have a value attribute. Why do we need an aria value now attribute, which is always going to be exactly the same thing? Similarly, count an aria value max. So we've got some discussion about, we want to just tell the browser what it should be doing. So this is kind of not exactly a proposal, but like a what if to get some discussion going. What if we could set this invisibly? What if we could just set an element.role value which wasn't reflected as an attribute? What if we could set an aria aliases property which is going to bind value max to count, value now to value? Those won't be reflected either. They will be set in JavaScript in the DOM, but they won't be reflected as attributes. Similarly, what if onKey down just made things automatically focusable without having to set a tab index attribute? Carl's a fan of that idea. So another issue that we have with the current state of things is IDRefs, and IDRefs just make me really sad. Two main reasons are IDRefs cannot go into another shadow at all. They just can't. So if we have, for example, a custom element that wants to refer to one of its internal elements inside its shadow DOM as its active descendant, it can't do that. There's physically no way to do it. Most of the time, this isn't an issue because stuff that's in Shadow DOM should really be presentational. So normally, anything that you want to be focusable is going to be one of the child elements. So I'll show an example of this in a minute. The other problem is that we're no longer talking about even a relatively static HTML page, something which you might generate using a client-side templating library, and then you can put good IDRefs on all of your attributes. You can make sure they're unique. We're now stamping out elements using client-side templates. So how can we guarantee that these IDs are going to be unique? Are we going to just use GeoIDs for everything? That's going to look horrendous. So here's an example. We have a Polymer menu element here, which has 3 children. Those children will be distributed into the shadow, but we want to say that the selected item is the first one. So it's element 0, which is settings. So in this case, it'll be styled correctly and it'll work for a sighted user, but we have no way of marking that up semantically. So again, we would need to actually force the user to add IDRefs and then force the user to add the ARIA ARIA active descendant information there. Or we would have to generate a globally unique ID for each of these elements. So this might be something that the core menu then has to take control of. Again, it doesn't know about the other elements in the page necessarily, so it has no way to do that. So some alternatives for this have already been discussed by the PFWD. So we have one proposal which allows us to use a selector. And the cool thing about selectors as well is that they can go into Shadow DOM. So we can use the shadow selector. But in this case, we could use some data binding. So we could say the 0th core item or whatever. We can also, another proposal, and I've slightly changed this from the original proposal, is that we can use actual non-reflected, again, properties on the element itself. So in this case, I've put everything inside an ARIA object that I'm vaguely proposing here, just so that we're not spamming the element API. So that this will allow us to set the active descendant to directly to an element in the page. So yeah, these are just some things to think about. This is what I've been thinking about a lot with custom elements. So I think there is work to be done on the accessibility standard side as well as on the browser side. So my last point that I wanted to make is that I feel, and Marcy sort of made this point a bit this morning as well, I feel like custom elements is a crisis opportunity. Hoping there are some Simpsons fans listening and I don't sound like a complete freak who makes up stupid words. So the crisis is that this may spell the end for native elements, which, as we all know, is pretty terrible for accessibility. We really don't want that to happen. So we can extend native elements, Markla, exactly. We can extend native elements, sort of. It doesn't work for input. It works for landmark roles. It works for buttons. And as far as I know, that's all. And then you still need to know to add it in the page as button is equals X button. So the user actually has to know that implementation detail in order to use your element. So yeah, it's a little bit, it could potentially be a little bit dicey for native elements. If everyone wants to be able to implement everything using custom elements and style it however they want. Hopefully what will happen is that the decorators proposal will allow us to style and create custom presentation for native elements as well. So hopefully this crisis won't actually occur. But we also have an opportunity, which is that we already have div soup everywhere. Have you looked at the Gmail source code? It's a nightmare. Can we create an environment where the best and most accessible web components dominate? And again, the styling story is going to be absolutely critical to this because we want to be able to share that the interaction and the semantics without imposing a style and a look on people. So just quickly on that. One idea that's been floated is this idea of having peer reviews. And you can go to that link to see a discussion about it. I haven't seen anything about an actual outcome from that yet. Someone else might be more up to date than I am. Yes. So if we have this idea of like a custom element marketplace where certain elements have been vetted by a panel of experts as being accessible, well written, minimal, etc., then hopefully we can try and avoid this. What was the word used at Edge conference? Like mountain of crud or something. Anyway, this absolute nightmare where we just end up in div soup, but even worse, because it doesn't look like div soup. It's like pretend Markla. All right, and yes, I did mention high contrast, and I didn't actually get a chance to implement it, so that's left as an exercise for the reader. And that is all I had.
Thanks, Alice. That was great. Let's tee up questions from the audience. Very well received. Mhm.
Apply author styles. Good question. What was Steve Faulkner's comment? I'm having some trouble.
Let me go back and see if I can pull it.
How do you bind ARIA attributes? So the proposal would be to, all right, I'm going to speak to the binding ARIA attributes. The proposal would be to have properties on the element as opposed to attributes. So properties on the elements which are not reflected. So there will be a little bit of a dance where if you do declare those ARIA attributes declaratively, then they will be reflected and they will be translated through to those properties. But if you declare it programmatically, it won't be reflected out into the declarative view of the element. So does that make sense? I'm trying to see if I can make this chat window bigger because it's about 4 lines. Okay, so Steve Faulkner. Oh. Steve Faulkner says, similar issues encountered with proposed summary details implementation activated by anonymous control in Shadow. How will it be given an accessible name? Where's this summary details implementation? I haven't seen that. So meanwhile, Carl asks, would those properties be built into Polymer Core? Are you talking about the ARIA, what did I call it? There we go. The ARIA aliases and the role and ARIA, etc. Yeah, so that would be the plan. But also it would be there will be work needed to be done in the browser as well. So we can polyfill this right now, but we'll still end up with sprouting attributes because there's simply no way to semantically set a role or any of those ARIA attributes on an element without them being reflected. So in the browser, what we would need to do is actually implement this idea of the non-reflected ARIA property. Caps are fine. You can be emphatic. So, can I? Steve says summary not control in Shadow DOM container is interactive element. So this is a control inside Shadow DOM, and you're wondering how to set the accessible name for it. Sorry, I'm still trying to understand the question. Great. So there's sort of a separate issue of, so inside of Shadow DOM, if you're, so you want to set the accessible name for an element inside of Shadow DOM from the light DOM. Is that what you're talking about? Right. So again, this is where either of those two proposals that I mentioned for setting. So a couple of things. So if you wanted to set this as a relation attribute, like an ARIA labeled by, you can refer to elements in any shadow in JavaScript. So that's actually not encapsulated the same way that it is in declarative HTML. The other thing is that, again, well, actually that applies to both. So that means that A, we can get a reference to that outside of the light DOM and just set an attribute on it. B, if we use one of those two proposals that I mentioned for relational attributes, they will both work. So you can pass a reference to an element directly to it. You can also use a selector which goes into the shadow. So with a selector, and Jonathan, we should, exactly. So Jonathan, we should come back to your earlier topic. I'm probably not the best person to speak to what the pros of sprouting attributes are. My understanding, and someone else might want to jump in and type an answer here. My understanding is that it means that everything is declarative and everything is transparent. So when you're talking about uh, and it makes a lot of sense before the custom elements world, I have to admit, because it means that when you have the markup of the page, you have the whole semantic, all the semantic information that you need. You can read it straight off of the markup. Um, so with regard to the ARIA-active descendant selector core item nth of type selected, um, it's going to be difficult to make it more shorthand because most of that is actually the selector itself. So the core item nth of type selected is the selector. So that's got to be in there. So I guess what we're talking about is whether we want to wrap it in selector. And I think, again, we don't really have any choice there because it needs to be backwards compatible. So we need to be able to use IDRefs still because everything to date has been using IDRefs. Does that answer your question? Yeah, I can see that. Jonathan saying that he feels uncomfortable with quotes within quotes. I don't think that's weird at all. I think it's like the dangling parenthesis problem. So I don't know what this apply author styles is. Thing is, I have to admit. So again, it may be that this we can set this ARIA active descendant declaratively, but we can also set it programmatically, which will allow us to avoid those double quotes. You still let CSS cascade into the shadow DOM or just deprecated. I unfortunately don't know the answer to that. I could probably run out and grab someone to answer it, but I'm not sure how long it'll be before I find someone. Let me just see if I can grab someone on chat. Discuss extending existing elements with regard to inheritance of methods and properties. Shell Ant Settlement, okay. I'm thinking about the extending existing elements. So as far as I know, so do you mean extending native elements or do you mean extending other custom elements? All of the above. So I haven't really played around with extending custom elements a great deal because I got discouraged as soon as I saw that you have to type button is equals X button. So yeah, I would have to have a play around with it and see what happens. But if you're extending custom elements, yeah, you'll get everything that comes with that custom element. And note that when you're extending custom elements, so in this case, we're extending Polymer UI theme aware, which is a non UI element. It's a non-instantiable element. So in that case, we don't need to type Polymer UI theme aware is equals Polymer UI ratings. Actually, it could get quite absurd if we had like several levels of extending. Custom checkbox. Yeah, extending native elements would be really interesting. Yeah, it would be really interesting to see what we could do with extending native elements. The problem would be getting that awareness of having to actually add it using either using script, as Marcy pointed out, or I'm pretty sure you can actually do it declaratively using that button is equals taco button, button is equals X button, and so on. I'm also not sure what happens with the rendering. I did have a look into this maybe 6 or 9 months ago, and again, I got discouraged really quickly, and I've immediately forgotten what actually happened, whether you actually get to render it yourself or whether, here we go. Just looking at button equals push button. Okay, so you do get to render it yourself. That's great. Jonathan asks, how much of what we see in regards to the moustache-looking markup and the on-tap magic events is planned to be native versus Polymer only? That's a good question. So again, I've mostly been looking at Polymer and less so with native, and I'm not a Polymer author. So my knowledge of that is hazy. So I think my understanding is that the moustache markup is part of the templating. The on-tap magic events, I think, is largely Polymer. Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you on that. Marcy may have a better idea, having played around a bit more with plain custom elements. Cool. Marcy says she's going to look into it as well. Yeah, thank you all for coming. CFWG people, I hope that we can do some work on all these properties and attributes and make things more awesome.
Any other questions for Alice? This has really been fantastic. There's certainly a lot of interest. You spiked a lot of discussion. We want to thank you sincerely for being a part of today's webinars.
Thanks so much for inviting me.